Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Hey everybody, welcome. We're glad to have all of you here today. We're going to do something a little special, a little different today, aren't we?
Yes, yeah, I'm excited. We're going to spend the second half of the webinar doing something. I'll leave it to Jackson to explain, but yes, I think it's going to be really helpful and interesting for everyone who's gearing up for the next exam.
We are still a long way away, really, from the February bar exam, but results are coming out around the country from the July test. We're going to talk a little bit about that. There have been some interesting developments this week on the tech front and some things that have happened there. And we're going to update everybody there. We're going to answer some questions that we've got from our students. So we've got a full agenda today.
Let's move on to results news. We just had 3 more states release results: Connecticut, Oregon, and Alabama. We're continuing to see the same trends of results, pass rates going down. Nothing really surprising with that, but obviously unfortunate. And we are also seeing, I know we've talked a little bit about, last time we talked a little bit about the tech problems that happen. And in 2 states, we're seeing some repercussions from that. So first in Illinois, they were slated to release their results this Friday on October 1st, and they have said they have delayed it. They're not sure when they're going to come out yet, but they have specifically delayed it because they are trying to study what happened with tech problems. I don't know what that means beyond that, unfortunately, if they're going to make changes to students, if they're going to give, I just don't know. So if you are an Illinois taker, sorry, you're going to have to wait a little longer than you.
It's almost cruel, isn't it? Because I'm sure that there are people who are thinking maybe they're going to cut me a break. I had a problem with my tech, but that's typically not what examiners do. And so I'm skeptical that that's actually what's going to happen. I suspect we're just going to get a result a week or 2 weeks from now, and they're going to say, we looked at it and we didn't think it was significant, which is going to be a real letdown. It would be nice if they'd say, you know what, we had this problem, we're going to give everybody X number of points, or we're going to readjust the people that we know were affected. It's hard to see where they're going with it. I think it's almost cruel to make people wait when you've given them a date to expect the results. So there you go, informed. Yeah.
So I think the second state where the tech issues have made an impact this week, kind of it can be instructive for maybe what does that actually mean for me if I'm an Illinois bar taker. So California released the results of a study that they did about the July exam and tech problems that people had. And I thought this was very interesting. So they said that they concluded that approximately 2% of California test takers had what they're calling meaningful impacts of lost time or content. So I want to be really clear because I think this is important. Like you just said, Jackson, there might be Illinois students or maybe in other jurisdictions who are saying, oh, I had to restart my computer. Thousands of people across the country had exams off, their computer screen went blank. They had to restart their computer and then begin the test again, okay? California delineated between people who did that and people who did that and then were not able to start the test, or there was a problem with the clock or something like that where they lost time. So I think that it's really interesting and not surprising probably that the one state, which California always leads the way in being the most transparent, I think, of all the bar exams, the one state who is saying publicly what happened and what they're planning on doing about it has really narrowed the group of people who they believe were meaningfully impacted to only people who meet probably a much more significant criteria than certainly people who just your screen went blank, you had to restart. That stinks because obviously if that was you, that put you in a very stressful spot. You were then delayed in your day. You were maybe feeling panicky. You might have had to spend time on the phone with ExamSoft, whatever it was. But for California, they are not including that in this 2%, they're saying, of takers who had a meaningful impact or lost time. So I found that very interesting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I agree. I think it's troubling. I look at it in reverse, I guess. I look at all the states that have released results that were in online formats like Florida, and it kind of makes you go, hey, Florida, what did you think about this? Illinois and California say there was a problem. You were using the same system. Any problem in Florida? And apparently, whatever problem there was, Florida decided, it doesn't matter to us. So that is really annoying and frustrating. And I know we had some students that had that experience. And I think, in fact, last week we had some questions from people about, should I challenge my scores? And I said, no, because there's no point in a state like Florida. They don't go back and do it. I think this is the proof of that. California and Illinois are saying pretty openly, yeah, something happened and we think it could have an impact. It didn't just happen in those two states. It happened any place that Examplify and ExamSoft software was being used. And so I would say in every jurisdiction that used that software and was in an online format that's released results, they're caught looking a little foolish, don't you think? Of like, why didn't you guys think this was significant when these two states clearly did? And maybe there's some others. We haven't heard from New York yet. We haven't heard from New Jersey. We haven't heard from DC. We haven't heard from Georgia. I think there are some other states that might take this opening from California and Illinois and say, okay, let's just call time out here and figure out what's really going on. And I think it's unfortunate that the NCBE didn't have a position on this. They just washed their hands and said it's not our problem. Yeah, I'm not sure you guys can walk away entirely hands-free on this. Illinois is a UBE state, so they certainly had a result there. Texas, I think, is another jurisdiction where we might be looking, although they were in person, but you still had to get on with your computer. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just when I thought we had cleared the weeds of the controversy around all of this, I think we're right back in it, and this is a story to keep an eye on. I think we're just seeing the leading edge of it. I think it's going to get big.
Yeah, definitely. So I do want to note too that California said that the state bar is working with its psychometrician to determine if they need to make any grading adjustments. So for the people, right? But I do think it's an interesting admission. When have you ever heard of a state bar saying, for 153 or 158 applicants, that they are potentially going to alter their scores? Yeah. That is
the only time this was anything close to it was in Georgia a few years ago. Remember, we had about 30 students that got their scores screwed up, and Georgia said, we think we made a mistake, and went back and they had their psychometrician look at it and do those numbers. And that's the only precedent that I can remember in 30 years. So yeah, we're in uncharted territory again. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. These are bad times to be bar examiners, if you ask me. There's just not a lot going well that makes people go, oh, I feel warm and fuzzy about the bar exam, right? Or about
definitely. I also thought it was interesting that in the same statement, the state bar talked about how basically it sounded very clear that they wish they could give the next exam online as well, but they cannot because the NCBE will not allow them to. And that's what California uses for the MBE portion. And so they said in there something about, we will proceed with plans to administer in person unless public health requirements or the California Supreme Court require otherwise. So we'll be keeping our eyes open on that.
That seemed like an invitation to the court, didn't it? Could you save us from this? And then, I don't know, maybe they give a they'd have to give a non-MBE exam. And that's great.
Yeah, I don't know what happens in that case, but
so, by the way, if you're a California student, keep studying the MBE, okay?
Yes.
Don't misunderstand us. You heard it here first. There is some reason to think the exam may,
it's hard to believe because I really can't fathom California not giving the MBE. So I don't really know what this means, but it seemed to be a bit of a passive aggressive jab at basically we don't have any choice, but if we have direction otherwise, we will figure something out. So.
Can you imagine the phone calls between the Cal Bar and the NCBE?
Yeah.
Not a love fest is my guess, but
all right. So let's talk about some study strategy questions that students have. And I love that people are starting to study and they're asking these questions. It's fantastic. So good job. If you are here and you are studying and working towards that February bar, you are way ahead of the game and you are going to be so grateful when we get to the holidays and when we get to January that you started in September. So good job. Yeah. All right. First, do you have any suggestions for using mind mapping to really drill down into detail? I watched all the mind mapping videos, and I know one of the big concepts to utilize during mind mapping is attempting to stay away from too many words.
Yeah, you want to be reducing things to just a couple of words or phrases, also using visuals and colors, because the brain, the non-conscious, responds to color, it responds to visuals and pictures. If you're using MindMeister, the app that we recommend, they've got a whole icon library. It's a great icon library. In fact, you can even import your own icons. And I've seen some incredible things that people have done there. But I also know a lot of people that handwrite their mind maps, and they use a lot of colored markers, and they do some designs. There's some extraordinary ones if you look at our Facebook page. The idea here is to not make it so wordy that you're just reprint. I've seen people try to reprint the entire outline in a mind map. It doesn't work, right? The idea is to shorten it, to condense it to the key elements. And part of the reason for that is educational. If you can synthesize the material into a few words, it means you have a better understanding. When you're just reciting it word for word, there's very little.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree that it is the mind map. I know the student, the question they're asking is a great question that we hear a lot. Like, people feel like, but I can't possibly get it all in there. And so therefore there must be some other place, there's some other tool where I need to write it all down or whatever it is. No, that's called the outline. It already exists. Like, the outline's been written. And so we already have that. You do not need to rewrite the outline. What you need to do is make sure that you understand the material. And I think that's such an important point, Jackson, that if you can synthesize the concept down into a clear, concise phrase, or, you know, several words, or list. I love lists. Put lists on your mind map. If you can do that, shows you have an understanding of the concept. If you find yourself saying, well, I couldn't possibly explain this concept without writing 3 paragraphs, you don't understand it well enough, right? Yeah. So you need to go back in and keep working with it until you can, right? Maybe the 3 paragraphs, maybe it should be a list of 3 different things, right? Something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to get into the weeds and think, I got to move fast. It's obviously faster to just block and copy stuff in, but that's actually not the purpose. Take your time. Every minute you spend on a mind map is really a good investment. And taking the extra 5 minutes on Megan's example of the 3 paragraphs will help you understand the concept in a way that'll now you'll own it. Whereas if you just mindlessly copied it over, it's pointless. So don't be in a hurry. If you're studying today, you've got plenty of time. Okay, you're the smart ones. You're the ones that get the advantage of that. When we start having this conversation in December, it looks a little different. And people are like, oh, I got an issue there. So just something to be aware of.
Definitely. All right, next, a question that we get a lot, which is such a good question. As a retaker, should I rearrange the order of my syllabus to reflect the weakest subject area and then going to my strongest area, or just follow the recommended photo reading syllabus? Time management has never been an issue for me, but this time around, I want to put emphasis on the substantive material and my mindset.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer here. I would opt in favor of simplicity. It's all on the course platform in order, and I would just follow through the course order as you see it. But if you felt deeply that if there's just this huge gap and you're really good in 6 multi-state subjects, but on one of them you're just horrible, I might go to that subject now and visit it again when I get there in the regular course of events. I think you can do it either way pretty safely. And it's easier to do it now in the course platform that we've got than it was before. You can see it all right there. You can find everything. It's pretty easy to move around as you need to. I think the key here is, again, your understanding of the material. Don't be in a hurry. If you're repeating the course, don't be in a hurry to just get through assignments. Take your time and really figure out what you're missing or what you don't understand. A great tool for this, the Bar Maps product. Bar Maps lets you get into the specific subparts of a subject, both in terms of the lecture and the mind maps, and then have the overview from the fast finish audio. So you're getting the ability to do a deep dive where you need it in a subject, but also getting the overview piece. And that's a nice thing. So let's say Civ Pro is your Achilles heel. Maybe you get the bar maps for Civ Pro and you work on that periodically while you're doing the rest of the course. So you're just getting an extra dose of that particular subject. And I think that's probably a pretty reasonable way to go. You have any thoughts about this?
I think that right now is early enough that I wouldn't be panicky about never be panicky, but I wouldn't be panicky about switching things up a little bit if I'm a retaker. If I'm starting now, you have so much time, you will be able to get through everything. I will say that the one word of caution with if you do rearrange things and start with the weak subjects and move to the strong is don't get bogged down. Remember the stepped repetition, right? Remember that you are coming back to things. Because I think where I've seen some people get stuck is that they're a repeater, and let's say con law is just their Achilles heel and it's really hard for them. But they also, it's not like they passed all the other subjects either. It's just that con law is the particularly hard one. And they get so discouraged and down with, I just can't understand this and this is so hard and I'm not getting it. And then they give up. And then they either spend way too long in that subject or they just flat out give up and they don't actually get to take the test because they're like, I just can't do it. So I will say you may want to take that into consideration, that there's something nice, I think, about when you follow the study guide in the order it is, you don't have a choice about it. And so put the pressure on us rather than putting it on yourself and giving yourself that, well, what do I pick next? And I picked the wrong thing and I can't go. If you're sticking with the syllabus as Jackson created it, then it's, oh, Jackson said to spend 4 hours on this and I did that. And now I have to go on to the next thing. And it's not, it doesn't matter how confident you feel in it. We're going to move on and keep moving.
Yeah, probably at this point, tens of thousands of data points. So we know what it takes to get through an assignment. We can actually see that and we know what the optimum timing is. So that's what we put in. And that's why we suggest it that way. So yeah, trust us. That's what you paid us to do. If you're out there somewhere later listening to this podcast and you're not in our course, why not? You should be thinking about what the structure is that works for you. I think for our students, it's pretty well laid out.
All right. And then one last question is, this is from someone who was not successful on the Florida bar. In Florida, what raw score was needed to pass? If I performed significantly better next time on the Florida multiple choice, would it matter on my results?
Yeah, the raw score doesn't matter at all. And when I do the video reports for people that failed, I point out that the raw score is really a function of how you did against a total raw of 390 points, and that has to be converted to 200 scale points. It's not the total number of raw points, it's where you get them. So there is no number that's a number at which you pass automatically in terms of the raw score. So ignore that entirely. In terms of what it takes to move the needle, it's really how you did compared to the mean raw. So look at your 6 categories, compare them to the mean raw in each of those categories, and then figure out roughly a standard deviation based on what the range is for that topic. So if you're in Florida multiple choice, the standard, the mean raw was 19 points and the range was 4 to 25. So when you're talking about a 21-point range, if you're 5 or 6 points below the mean raw, standard deviation, at least the way I understood statistics, is you're going to get clobbered, and that's the difference. So I don't think you should overanalyze those numbers. And that's why I do the videos, so you don't have to do that. I try to give you a pretty good overview. And I will say we're pretty well caught up on videos for people. Fortunately, we had a lot of successes in the exam so far. But for those of you that were not successful, we've sent you videos, or we will in the next couple of days. And you should look at those and review them. I'm pretty clear about how to interpret your scores. But I think it's so easy, don't you, Megan, to look backwards and get really frustrated by that instead of saying, okay, it just wasn't good enough. Now what I've got to do is move forward. And typically what we try to do, if you're in our courses, we try to give you some specific suggestions about how you can move forward and what you have to do differently.
Exactly. All right. So let's now pivot to something new. And I think I'm excited. I think hopefully really helpful for people as they're starting to figure out how in the world to tackle essays on the bar exam. Jackson, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. Megan and I were talking and we said, we think that this is a good time to start to provide some substance in these Q&As that would help people as they're getting underway. And we thought a great place to start today would be with an anatomy of an essay. And if you are listening to this later as a podcast, I'm going to encourage you to check out our website and actually watch this. I think it'll be more helpful to you as a video. If you're watching, that's great. And I hope it's helpful for you. I wanted to walk you through an actual essay question. Megan's going to stay with me and we're going to talk through it together. But we wanted to give you an idea of how you should look at an essay in order to keep from freaking out, because we know that as people start and get underway, this is one of the real deep concerns that they might have. And so we thought we'd take an actual uniform bar exam essay and we break it down for you. We're not going to show you how to write it. We're going to show you how to analyze it and how it's made up in the component parts. We're calling this Anatomy of an Essay, and I hope that it's helpful for you. And feel free to go back and watch it later, but we're gonna do it. So Megan, I assume everybody can see our screen there, that we're good on that.
I'm not seeing it. Let me know in the chat box, guys, if you cannot see it. But yeah, I think we're good so far.
All right, well, let's go ahead and jump in then. So this is our essay question, and I'm going to actually read it out loud to you. And what I've done is that each slide is going to be a separate paragraph of the question. So I want you to just listen, and I'll talk a little bit about it as we go through. So here's our question. It starts with this. A father visited a computer store owned by a woman who touted her expertise in computer systems for gamers. The father explained to the woman that he wanted a computer system that would enable his son to play even the most advanced online computer games with ease. But as he told the woman, I know nothing about computers. I really need you to pick the right system. Now, this is our first paragraph, and it obviously tells us right away that we're into probably some sort of a contracts problem, but more significantly, we've got a quotation from one of the parties. And when you actually get language, that's usually a pretty important piece, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very interesting when people start out reading the essays, like where does your brain go at the beginning? What is it that when you see one of these really complicated, convoluted essays, I think it's really helpful to think what stands out to you, what kind of language do you see, but also what maybe is intimidating to you.
And I think sometimes quotes are really a good visual clue. That might be something important to us. So just keep that in mind. I don't know anything about computers. I need you to pick the right system. Okay, next paragraph. The woman showed the father a display model of a computer gaming system and said, quote, here's the system for you, only $2,500. She then described some of its technical specifications, none of which the father understood. I can relate to this. Relying on the woman's recommendation, the father told the woman that he would buy the computer gaming system for $2,500. The woman replied, quote, sign our purchase agreement, pay me, and it's yours. The father said, great. And both he and the woman, on behalf of the store, signed the store's standard purchase agreement. Now, again, this is only the second paragraph of our essay, but it seems pretty clear to me already that this father is relying on what the woman is telling him. That's what the storyline is telling us. You don't have to overread that or overthink it. It's just pretty clear that what's happening is, here's what I recommend for you, and the father doesn't understand any of that, so he relies on her recommendation. Okay, Megan, you want to add anything to that paragraph?
No, I think the big thing that should jump out at people, because here's the thing, a lot of people, when they read an essay like this, a paragraph like this, the $2,500 is what jumps out at them, because they're like thinking, oh, number. But remember, we're not in a math word problem, we're in a law word problem. So the key thing that should jump out to you is relying on the woman's recommendation. I think that is like the most, they use the word rely, which we know is going to be important one way or the other. That should be the thing that jumps out at you in this.
Okay, good. Agreed. Next paragraph. The front page of the purchase agreement indicated that the store was selling the man a computer gaming system for $2,500, listed the basic specifications of the system and its components, and indicated that the sale was, quote, subject to our standard terms and conditions. There were signature lines for the buyer and the seller at the bottom of the front of the purchase agreement. The back of the purchase agreement contained a list of terms and conditions, 16 numbered paragraphs printed in a very small typeface. The 12th paragraph stated, seller makes no warranties that extend beyond the description of the computer on the first page of this agreement. Nothing on the front of the purchase agreement indicated that there was any text on the back, and there is no indication that the father turned over the purchase agreement and saw the text on the back. All right, look, at this point, even if you don't know very much about contract law, something should be going off, your spidey sense should be going off saying, geez, that doesn't sound right. How is he supposed to know that little tiny term and condition, number 12 out of 16, in a very small typeface, right? That should make you be aware that something's wrong. You agree with that, Megan?
Yeah, definitely. I am always telling my students that we need to not drop our common sense when we walk into the bar exam. And I think this is a great example of that. You could just be a person living in the world, never having gone to a day of law school, but all of you have been to law school and taken contracts classes. And so certainly you and maybe your mom and maybe even a child of yours would be able to read this paragraph and go, gosh, it seems awfully important that on the back of the purchase agreement, it had this, right? It's nothing on the front of it, that it was 16 numbered paragraphs, that it was printed in very small typeface. It's a lot of detail that they give you. So this should all be, again, we don't have to be genius lawyers to figure this out. We can just use our common sense. And I think that's so often people forget that and they think, no, I must put on my special super lawyer hat. And it's like, no, just as a person living in the world, what do you think about it?
Exactly. And he didn't turn over the agreement. So that's important. All right, let's keep going. The father paid for the computer system, took it home, and gave it to his son, who was thrilled. After a week of use, however, it became clear that the computer system was inadequate for the needs of online gaming. The father then consulted a computer expert who reported that the system was adequate for use in an office environment, but did not have the high-speed components necessary for online gaming. The expert also said that a system that would be sufficient for the son's needs, as had been described by the father to the woman who owned the computer store, would cost at least $3,200. All right, so now it's still not a math problem, but now I've got a second number. We started with 2,500, now I've got 3,200, and we have somebody called a computer expert. And whenever I see the word expert, that's always going to get my attention, because it wasn't just his friend, his next door neighbor, who told him. He went to someone who knows what they're talking about, a computer expert. And it's pretty clear that now this computer doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So I now think we're beginning to get the outlines of where this problem is headed. And even if we haven't read all the way through to the end yet, we can see that there's a problem. Up until this point, he was buying a computer. It seemed to be a good thing, and everything was good, even if he didn't read the 12th item on the back. But now we've got a problem, right? So this is the tipping point in the question. Do you see it that way, Megan?
Yeah, definitely. I think it also is something that I would, if I was reading through this and I didn't know what the calls of the question were yet, I would certainly look at this end part and say, okay, I know, I don't know which way I'm going to come out, but I know that the fact that they have given me a specific number of what it would cost for the father to get what he actually needed is probably going to play into, there's probably going to be some remedy piece to this question. Yeah. They're probably going to be asking me of a remedy of some sort, and I'm going to need to take this into consideration for that. Regardless of which way I fall, I'm going to need to, this is going to factor into my argument, certainly.
So I want to just stop before we go to the next paragraph to say that if you are listening to this, and later if you go back and listen, what Megan and I are doing is basically being detectives. We're finding the clues in each paragraph, and yet we haven't gotten to the call of the question yet. We haven't tried to get an overarching sense. We're just trying to find the important clue pieces in each part of the question. So let's keep going. The father immediately went back to the computer store with the computer system, told the woman that the computer system was inadequate, told her about the expert's analysis, and demanded his money back. The woman pulled out her copy of the purchase agreement and said, quote, "This computer is exactly as specified in the description on the front of the purchase agreement. Plus, as the terms and conditions on the back say, there are no warranties beyond that description. You're not entitled to any money back," close quote. All right, so now what we've got is that, as I said in the last paragraph, we got to the tipping point. We knew there was a problem. Now the problem is coming into sharper focus. We now know that what the man wants, the father wants, is to return the computer, get his money back, and because it doesn't meet his needs. And the woman's response to that is, nope, it's exactly what we put in the purchase agreement, and we had this special language, this warranty that says you're not entitled to any money back. So now the conflict is pretty clear, isn't it?
Yeah, this is funny. I don't think they usually do this, but they just set up perfectly. They gave you the arguments. Like it's really nice. Take that gift when you see it. You don't need to come up with the argument. You've they've been given to you, and now you just get to fill in the law. Perfect.
This paragraph is a conflict pair. I mean, I didn't, just to be clear, I'm using an actual question from 2020. So I just picked one, but I was like, ooh, Valhalla, we've got the conflict pair right there. Okay, next pair. Assume that the computer system is identical to the display model shown to the father and is as specified on the front of the purchase agreement, and that the expert is correct about the inadequacies of the computer system for online gaming and the cost of a system that would meet the son's needs. Now, this kind of a paragraph is important. That's all that's in the paragraph. But essentially what they're saying is don't overthink it. Don't overanalyze it. We're just going to tell you, for our purposes, everything is just what we've said it is, right? And isn't this where a lot of our takers go right off the rails? They start trying to find something that isn't there. Like maybe it was a used model, or it was an upgrade model, or maybe the expert had a bias because he hated the woman in the computer store. Aren't those the things that we tend to see?
Yeah, definitely. This is why we advocate for following conflicts as opposed to issue spotting, because sometimes issue spotting can create whole worlds in your head about, let's imagine that actually the expert wasn't really an expert. So now we need to talk about experts and how the qualifications right. So I love these because they're the no loophole paragraph where it's just, okay, don't get into the weeds here. Don't make up things that aren't actually in evidence here, right? Facts not in evidence. Just take what we've given you at face value and deal with the real conflicts, not these made up ones.
Yeah. And these are sweetheart paragraphs when you get them, because essentially they take the restrictions off and say, just take everything as given, right? And don't fight the facts. And we say that all the time, don't fight the facts. So that's what this paragraph is saying. Okay. Now after all of that was the last paragraph. Now we get to the actual call of the question. I want to read and this is a question that's got 3 specific calls, but we're going to break it down. So let me read you the 3 calls of the question. Number 1, does the computer system conform to the store's contractual obligations? That's number 1. Number 2, assuming that the computer system does not conform to the store's contractual obligations, does the father have the right to return the computer system to the store and get the purchase price back? So again, assuming that it doesn't conform, does the father have the right to return and get the purchase price back? And question 3, assuming that the computer system does not conform to the store's contractual obligations and that the father has the right to return the computer system and get the purchase price back, comma, does the father also have the right to additional money damages? Now, after each one of these calls of the question is the word explain. I didn't put that in because obviously that's what you got to do. You're not just giving a yes or no answer. So the answer isn't yes, yes, and yes. It's something more than that. One of the things that should jump out at you as you look at those 3 questions is there's a logical progression to them. In fact, they even repeat most of question 2 and question 3, right? Does that jump out at you too, Meg?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes we see these kind of domino questions where they have a foundational piece. In this, it's does the computer system conform to the contractual obligations? And then assuming that domino falls, then X, answer X, and then assuming that one. The key, though, I think that I always warn people about is just because it says assuming it doesn't conform or assuming it, whatever it is, you need to assume it for that question, but do not assume it for the first question where they're asking it of you. So sometimes people make that mistake and they think, oh, that must mean that's the answer. It may be the answer, and we're going to talk about it in this one, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the correct answer. So never take that as they haven't forgotten and slipped up and accidentally told you the correct answer. Okay.
Right. They're smarter than that. So it might be that the computer system doesn't conform. And so that would change, but we're told in question 2 and 3, assume that. And so for our purposes of analysis, even if you reach a conclusion in question 1 that's contrary, it doesn't change. You have to go in question 2 to assume that it does. So I think Megan's point is really a good one. But this is a classic example of the domino question theory. You don't always see it, but when you get it, just be aware of it. So now these are the 3 questions in front of us. We've had the whole fact pattern in front of us. And now for most people, they're like, I'm sorry, I don't do this as well as Megan's daughter. She She's a Peter Rabbit 2 fan, and I believe the actual line is sorry, but you get the idea. There's a panic moment, right? There's a moment when you're looking at all this and you start to overthink it. And you'll see that there's a post-it note on the back there that says, don't overthink. And there's check marks and chills and take a break and all sorts of other things. This is the moment, I think, in the anatomy of an essay when you absolutely have to take a moment and breathe and give yourself the luxury of a couple of minutes to just think about the problem. Now, Megan and I are going to break down what happens next, but I think this is a good moment to just stop and say, if what you've heard so far scares you, that's okay. You just don't have to live there. But what I hope is that because we did some detective work and we talked about it, you actually are feeling pretty good at this point. Okay, I think this is manageable. You want to add anything to that?
No, I think you're right. I think that it is, if you walk through the essay as you read it, like we just did, a detective, I like how you said, like how you said that, like as a detective, then by the time you get to those calls of the question, you're really probably not going to be taken super off guard by them. Generally, what they're going to be asking you, because you have used the context clues within the essay itself to see they're talking an awful lot about this, or they're giving me these details. I wonder why. It's approaching the question with some curiosity. I wonder why they're telling me that. It's not like the MBEs in terms of when you haven't seen the call of the question yet. You're not going in saying, oh, I bet the call of the question is going to be X, but instead it's being curious about, they gave me this information. I wonder what that could be used for. It feels important to me. It feels like it's standing out. I wonder why I feel that way. What is this bringing up?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And so I think what I want to emphasize here is that at this moment, if you feel anxious, just take a moment and take a breath. It's going to be okay. And we're going to show you what happens next. But it's not, you don't have to be at that crisis moment when you finish reading the problem. And I think so many people get into that crisis moment and then they can't extricate themselves from it. So let's move forward. I think that the way you solve this kind of a problem in an essay question is to break it into smaller pieces. You don't try to absorb the whole thing and eat the elephant in one big bite, but instead you break it into the smaller pieces and start thinking, I think, consistently and in a logical way about each step that you want to take. So let's go ahead and look at that. The first step that I think is here, we've got these questions, and I would start asking myself some questions around this. And this is going to get us to something, Megan, that you talk about a lot with your students in the writing workshop. And that is that we had that first call of the question, and you recall that it just talked about whether the computer conformed. But really, there are several hidden questions that are unarticulated, but are necessary for us to answer that bigger question. So we're breaking it into smaller pieces. The first piece that comes to my mind, the foundational piece, is this a contract for sale that's governed by common law contract principles or by Article 2 under the Uniform Commercial Code? And here's why that's important in my mind. We have a computer vendor and we have a father. And Megan, you were giving me a great example earlier today. You want to share it about when you would ask this question and maybe when you don't need to ask this question?
Yeah, so I talk, if any of you have taken the personal writing workshop with me or worked, then we talk about letting the conflicts guide us. And so with this one, we've got this first call of the question. Does the computer system conform to the store's contractual obligations? But in order to answer that, there's a few separate conflicts. And so this first one is, which kind of law do we apply? We need to, it's not being explicitly asked, but there's no way to answer what the store's contractual obligations were unless we know if we're applying common law or UCC. So what the example that I actually use with my students is also a UCC example, where I talk about how if we had an essay where you had what is essentially Target versus Walmart, you would not need to talk about whether the UCC applies, because they are merchants, right? So if we're talking about UCC law for merchants, we know that's not in conflict. These are two giant big box stores. So of course that's going to apply. We don't need to deal with that. It's not a foundational piece that needs its own section. If, however, we're dealing with Target versus a mom who sells things at her kid's school fundraiser, let's say. That mom might be saying, I'm not a merchant and I want the common law to apply. And Target is saying, no, UCC. So we, in that case, would need to have a discussion. We'd have a conflict pair, et cetera, a discussion about whether or not we would apply common law or the UCC. Yeah, I think it's really important to take that step back with a question and think, are there component pieces or threshold issues that we need to discuss initially in order to fully answer this question and not just take it at face value?
Yeah. And so while I would be opposed to all the time talking about Article 2 versus common law contract, here, I think it's implicated by the question. You have one merchant and you have a father. So I think it's a first question that you have to answer. So let's keep going because I think there are a couple of other hidden questions in question 1. And the second of those is this question. When a buyer makes clear to the seller the buyer's particular purpose for the goods, and then that buyer is relying on the seller to select the appropriate item, does the contract to buy the goods that's selected by the seller, does that contain a warranty that the goods are fit for that purpose? Now, as you were reading the fact pattern or listening to us read it, you probably thought of the word warranty because it was used in the fact pattern, right? There's a question of the express warranty or maybe an implied warranty, but really, without getting explicit in the call of the question, I think we have to know about this kind of a situation. The buyer relied on the seller to select the goods. The examiners don't ask that specifically, but I don't think you can get to the answer to question 1 without dealing with that particular problem. Do you agree, Megan?
Definitely. And it's really set up for you in the question, right? Again, it's that put on your common sense hat, right? You clearly have the father, the facts are so clear. They put on like neon flashing lights showing the dad completely relied on her. They even use that language, right? It relied on her expertise. She said, oh, I'm the person who knows about online gaming and I can tell you what to do. He said, I know nothing about it. And then I'm relying on you. So this is very much a follow, even if you feel lost, follow the facts.
Yeah. And then I think there's a third subpart to the first question, and that is whether the warranty that's described in the contract, even if it's on the back of the written agreement and it contained language stating there were no warranties, is that going to apply here, even though beyond the description on the front of the agreement? In other words, is the warranty, is it going to be valid when it's hidden in the back? And I think all three of those questions have to be asked in order to know whether or not we've got a conforming item, right? So it's getting a little more in depth about that warranty language, but really now it's getting to that thing we were talking about, that it was hidden in the back. And I think this is where that question is going to get answered.
Definitely.
Okay, so look what we've done. In the first call of the question, we've actually got 3 subparts here. Now, you could, and I think it would not be inappropriate to write about each of those 3 items. You might write 3 paragraphs about each. Maybe you're going to be able to handle the first one about the UCC versus Article 2 in just a single paragraph. But I think that we really have to answer these non-explicit questions to get to the answer to the first question. And here's the interesting part of this to me, Megan. The first call of the question is the shortest in number of words, but it's actually the longest to write about, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is common. It's certainly not uncommon. And you definitely don't want, it's a great point. You don't want to trick yourself into thinking, it's the least, I don't really need to say much about it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's got, here in Disney in Orlando, we call these hidden Mickeys. There's 3 hidden Mickeys here. They didn't ask you any of these 3 questions explicitly, but you've got to answer all 3 to be able to answer that question. And once you've answered that, questions 2 and 3 in the call of the question aren't that big a deal. So let's look at that next call of the question. Question number 2 really says, in effect to me, if goods don't satisfy a warranty that's in a contract for their sale, is the buyer entitled to return the goods and get their money? Now that's a pretty straightforward question, isn't it? If I think I'm buying something and it doesn't satisfy the warranty, am I entitled to return the goods and get my money back? That's not a terribly complicated question, is it?
No, I think that one shouldn't take you too long to answer.
And I think your gut reaction is, of course they should get their money back. That's just not hard. So that to me is the gimme in the question. And then the third call of the question is a little tricky. The third question, in effect, says if the buyer rightfully rejects goods, or in this case, revokes acceptance of them, is the buyer entitled to damages in addition to a refund of the purchase price? Now, here's what makes, this is where I geek out as a law professor. I love this question because what does it tie back to? It goes all the way back to item number 1. Is this UCC or is it common law? Because, and you may not know this in your studies yet, but if it's common law, do you get a refund plus damages? And the answer is typically you don't. But if we're under Article 2 of the UCC and it's a rightful rejection of goods, now forget about dad and the computer, just rightful rejection of goods, can you get damages in addition to the refund of the purchase price? Under the UCC, the answer is yes. And so it actually becomes a really easy question once you're in the world of the UCC. But if you haven't figured that out in the very first part of this question, you're not likely to get that answer because it feels weird, doesn't it? Like he returned it, he should get his money back. What do we mean he's going to get the extra money? But the examiners gave us clues about that when they gave us that extra amount, they gave us the expert, and when we began to see that we were in Article 2. Yeah, it's kind of weird, isn't it? And some of you may want to go back and watch this later and go, oh, that's what they were talking about. But that's the structure. So you see we had 3 questions from the examiners, but really 5 things we want to talk about. And that's the process that you want to be going through in your analysis before you get too far into the writing. So you want to be thinking through this logically. Now, my point about all of this is to not make this more complicated than necessary. I think it is the goal of most bar takers to make things very complicated, to make them difficult and complicated and confusing and intricate and expand the problem and make it very tough. But in reality, what we just walked you through is not very tough, is it? It's a UCC problem. There's clearly a point at which those warranties, we can ignore the warranty on the back, it looks like, and the merchant has to conform with what they put in their warranty. Given their failure to conform, you can return the goods and get your money back. That's easy. And you can return your goods, get the money back, and get the damages that it would take to achieve what you wanted. You want to say anything about this problem of complication?
Oh, I think it's really just comes down to not throwing everything out the window when you sit down to write an essay. It feels in some ways comforting to go back to the well of what hasn't worked in the past just because it feels very familiar. But if it hasn't worked in the past, you've got to stand strong. And the more you do it in practice, the much easier it will be on exam day. But standing strong and saying, I don't need to throw everything in the kitchen sink at this problem. I need to stop and figure out what is actually in conflict in this essay and then just answer those questions, which is really contrary to maybe how you've been taught in the past to handle legal essays. And so it can feel like I should probably just throw something in about that and maybe this, and maybe I'll just talk about, I remember this from my contract study, so I'll just tell them, I'll dazzle them with this information as well. And instead, and then you find yourself going, oh, I didn't answer the whole question. This is a lot to get in 30 minutes. This is a UBE question. It's a whole lot to get in 30 minutes. So instead, I really think with the overcomplicating, what I tend to see is that people can start to panic and just say, I'm just going to issue spot and throw in everything I can. And then you don't actually get to the heart of any of it and don't make more work for yourself than actually.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So as we reach some conclusions about this, the conclusion I think that you as a writer would have is that the transaction between the father and the store was governed by Article 2. That seems pretty reasonable. I think also we know that the woman knew that father wanted this computer for video games and that father was relying on her to select a suitable computer. So the contract for sale of the computer had a warranty that the computer was fit for that purpose. That's what he was intending. And the language on the back of the sales agreement didn't effectively exclude that warranty because it wasn't conspicuous, it wasn't obvious, and the system wasn't fit for the father's purpose, so it didn't conform to the store's contractual obligation. These are all basic conclusions from the problem. Then the father either rejected the computer or he accepted it and then revoked his acceptance, if you want to use UCC language. But in either event, he's entitled to return the computer and recover his original purchase price of $2,500. And in addition to that, he's entitled to recover damages equal to the difference between the market value of the computer that satisfied the warranty of fitness and the contract price. And we know that difference is $700. Those are the conclusions. It's not more complicated than that. As Megan said, you don't have to go crazy in issue spot. That's what the question is asking you. Those are the conclusions that are involved. Pretty straightforward. Now, having said all of that, there are three things that we want you to keep in mind around the anatomy of an essay as you work on it. Number one, the first thing is don't panic. Read the question calmly, right? Seems pretty clear. The second thing is look at each call to the question separately. Here we could see that they were dominoes, they build on each other, and we don't have to overwrite in question 2 or 3 because most of the work is being done in question 1. And then the third thing is preview the general conclusion to each question before you begin writing. Everything that we just did here is what you would do step by step. Megan, you want to add anything to that before we wrap this?
I just think that this is hopefully an insight into the way that people who have read thousands and thousands of bar essays look at them, right? This is literally what Jackson and I both do when we approach a bar essay, when we get a new one from a new exam and we're reading it over and we're talking with editors about it. This is exactly what we do. And so if you notice, we haven't gotten into how to write it at all, but it's more the how to think about it. And so we just really hope that's helpful for people to get an understanding. It's not just, writing is not just your hands, your fingers on the keys. Writing is also the thoughts that go through your mind long before you get to the actual typing part.
Yeah. Using the FLA method is not what we're talking about today. We haven't even gotten to that. We'll talk about that on a different day, but we wanted to give you this sense of how you analyze and put it together. And I hope that that's helpful for everybody. I hope that you all get a feeling for what that process is like. We'll come back on screen here. But I wanted to just give you that feeling for how we break it out. And as Megan says, how we look at it and analyze it. So we'd love to get your feedback. If this is helpful for you, let us know. We'd like to do more of these things if they are helpful, but this was fun to do, wasn't it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we don't often get to talk about the way we think about it. So it's like pulling spaghetti out of our brains. Here's, when we have to articulate what is it that we do, which sometimes feels second nature to us, but we know it's new to other people. So thanks, Megan, for helping and analyzing that. That's always fun. And thank you all for being with us today. We'll be back next week. We'll be talking about more results and more stuff that's happening, keep you informed on all of that. Want all of you to keep studying. This is the time to get underway, right? We turn the corner in Doctor. It's time to get into it. Any last words you want to wrap up with, Megan?
Just helping you guys in any way we can to write these essays.
Yeah, fun stuff. All right, everybody, have a great week and weekend, and we will see you again next week. Thanks, Megan. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.